Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and as you can see, I have a very special and very old whiskey in front of me. This is the brand new Blade & Bow 30-year Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey. It's bottled at 109 proof or 54.5% ABV, and I've gotta be honest, I think this is probably the oldest bourbon that I've ever had the chance to taste. Now, recently I did have the opportunity to try a 33-year-old MGP rye whiskey. It was kind of like this crazy one-off bottling from many years ago. I think it was either aged or bottled, or maybe even both of those things somewhere overseas. It had a very low cask strength, something like the high 80s or low 90s. And so when you put all these things together, it kind of makes sense for a 33-year rye whiskey, right? You can't age that barrel at the top of a rickhouse for 33 years to try to crank up the proof, because there's not gonna be any whiskey left in the barrel at the end of that maturation process. And so for this rye, I would imagine it was aged on the lower floors. That's why you get a lower cask strength. It's also why you have any whiskey left in the barrel. But the reason I'm talking about this experience I had with this 33-year rye whiskey is because it was kind of a paradigm shifting whiskey experience for me. And I know that sounds nerdy. I'm gonna talk a little bit more here. So if you wanna skip ahead, I will put chapter markers along the bottom of the video. But think back throughout your bourbon journey of a bottle that kind of like changed your perception of what was possible, especially with like flavor profiles. For me, one definite bottle that fits in this category is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Batch B520 was just like a mind-altering thing. You're like, holy crap, I can't believe whiskey tastes like this. I was early on in my journey. Then fast forward a few months later and I got to try Knob Creek 12-year. And that Knob Creek 12-year was the first time that I really tasted like a highly aged oak profile. No, it's not a perfect whiskey, but that Knob Creek 12-year really showed me what oak and leather and just overall aged bourbon can taste like. And so moving on from that, once I got into the 15-year single barrels and you start to taste other random like highly aged products, like you're kind of set up to enjoy those things and understand those things because of the bottles that you've tried before it. And so that Knob Creek 12 for me, again, was kind of like that gateway drug to just becoming an oak fiend. And that's kind of an appropriate thing to say moving into this Blade & Bow here, right? Because 30 years in a barrel, you're gonna expect some oak there. This is a special bottle. It's an expensive bottle, $1,200 SRP. It's about $2,000 on the secondary market. A great proof point here, 109 proof, 54.5%. I mean, you really don't expect that kind of a proof, not only from Blade & Bow, but just from any like super aged bourbon. You kind of expect it to be, like I said, that 33-year rye, very low cask strength. So hats off to Blade & Bow for actually bottling this at a very respectable proof point. But as I think back to my experience with this rye, as I think back to my paradigm shifting whiskeys I've had, I look at this Blade & Bow 30 and I'm hoping that this is gonna be another one of those moments. And so it's a special bottle for me because it's probably gonna be the last review I film in this room. You guys can see the shelves are almost bare. I'm moving things over to the new house that my wife and I just moved into. I'm setting up the studio over there. So if this isn't the last review that gets filmed here, certainly gonna be one of the last. And if you've skipped ahead in the video using the little chapter markers, you're gonna pop in right here as we move into this. So I think we've talked about the stats, the price point, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how limited this bottle is, but the presentation is freaking beautiful. It's a heavy bottle. It's got this kind of cool glass design here. Great color to it. It's kind of a deep, rich color. So let's go to the nose now and see what we get. All right, so the first thing that I'm gonna say here on the nose is just that this smells like an extremely special whiskey. And on one hand, it kind of smells exactly how I would expect it to. I mean, it's got tons of oak, it's deep, it's rich, it has a very highly aged Kentucky bourbon sort of profile. But on the other hand, it sort of defies my expectations because I get so much more fruit and freshness out of the glass here than I would ever expect from a bourbon that's spent 30 years in a barrel. I mean, usually you would think that this is gonna be just an oak bomb and nothing else. And listen, there's no shortage of oak here. I'm just gonna tell you guys right now, I'm gonna save all the comparisons for another video or another live stream, but I've put this next to 18 to 23-year bourbons I have in my collection. And when you do them side by side, this makes all of those other products smell young. Like by comparison, it is pretty remarkable. So there's no shortage of oak here, but there's so much else going on. Like there's so much fruit and there's so much like kind of damp earthiness, like, forest floor kind of notes that, folks will often talk about with certain red wines. It's deep, rich, complex. There's a lot going on. So I'm going to just shut up now and go back to the nose and keep digging in. Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of dissect this whiskey is going to be to talk about the most prominent notes first, kind of moving towards the things that are most in the background. And so the main thing that I get from this, honestly, is like cherry vanilla Coke. If any of you have ever used those Coca-Cola Freestyle machines and you can kind of make your own flavor combinations, cherry vanilla Coke, this smells exactly like that with a little bit of like a, slightly medicinal twist. It's not overly medicinal. When I first cracked the bottle open, very medicinal, very bitter. That has since really kind of blown off and this thing has opened up in a really nice way. But it's like cherry vanilla Coke, slightly medicinal, some blood orange here, which is adding a little bit of that kind of sourness. And you're also just gonna get a decent bit of sourness from this much, time in a barrel. Lots and lots of oak. You're gonna get some tannin, you're gonna get some sourness. But I think it's really, for me, coming from this kind of like blood orange note on the nose. And so just underneath all of those more vibrant fruit notes is a heavy, heavy layer of German chocolate cake, chocolate sauce, fudge, brownie, all sort of notes that I usually talk about on very highly aged Heaven Hill products. William Heaven Hill 19, the Oakley 20-year single barrels from earlier this year, the 20-year very old St. Nick Believe bottle. Some of these aren't confirmed Heaven Hill, but it's pretty much assumed that that's what they are. And all of them have that in common, which is this humongous sort of chocolate note. And for me, this Blade & Bow 30, it's mostly like German chocolate cake or really any sort of like triple chocolate dessert that you can think of. That layer is one of the most prominent aspects of the whiskey, kind of supporting the sourness that you get from the blood orange and the oak tannins on the nose, also supporting, again, that cherry vanilla Coke that I just can't get enough of. But underneath that heavy chocolate layer, there's also vanilla cream, one of my favorite highly aged whiskey notes. There's also a little bit of like nuttiness, which I find interesting. It's almost kind of reminding me of Heaven Hill in that way too, where I'm getting, in this case, not peanut. It's more of like a bittersweet marzipan, almond, maybe mixed nuts kind of thing. And it actually kind of reminds me of Armagnac just a little bit. Yeah, it's like this note. If any of you are familiar with Armagnac, if you've tried like 25 to 50-year Armagnac, there's something in there called Rancio. You can get online and read about it. It's this bittersweet walnut skin kind of thing that develops in Armagnac, and it develops in different ways with different producers. But generally speaking, it's a bittersweet nuttiness. This reminds me of really old Armagnac on the nose, not only because of that nuttiness, but also because there's kind of like this blackberry jam thing in the background, a little bit of this brandy sort of element to the whiskey too. So overall, very layered. It has a little dusty quality to it, hanging out in the background, tons of oak, great fruit, great freshness. It's complex. It's actually very soft on the nose too, which is kind of a cool aspect of it. It's not a wow factor whiskey on the nose as far as like jumping out at you, but it's a wow factor because it's so soft and so well integrated. So I think I've talked enough in this video already. It's time to taste this thing. Cheers. Guys, the flavor profile of this whiskey is absolutely ridiculous. It really has any and every note you could possibly imagine from a highly aged Kentucky bourbon. So just like on the nose, on the palate, there is no shortage of oak, right? But the oak on the palate for me is very soft and velvety. Like it adds a velvety texture to the whiskey, and it's more of like a background foundational underpinning. So I feel like everything else that I'm getting is sort of blending in, to the oak, which is kind of this soft base layer. So right up front, the first thing that I notice on the palate is a little bit of that fruity thing that I talked about on the nose, that freshness. I get the cherry vanilla Coke. I get that tangy blood orange thing that I really like. And I actually think on the palate, I'm starting to pick up a little bit more citrus, even more than the nose. So I get a little lemon rind at the front of the palate, which adds kind of like this lifted feeling to the whiskey. It adds like this mentholy kind of citrusy freshness, which again is so crazy to say about a 30-year Kentucky bourbon. Now, as the whiskey rolls back and it starts to develop on the palate, I get more into these like chocolate notes, heavy oak in the mid palate. The cherry vanilla Coke thing is kind of present throughout the entire thing, But I think the coolest part of the whiskey is probably the finish, because the mid palate is soft. It's not flat, but if you're looking for a whiskey that's gonna be extremely full bodied, this is not really gonna do that for you on the mid palate. But as I'm talking through the finish now, I'm actually getting a ton of cardamom. So it's getting more into the like aromatic baking spice, clove cardamom realm on the finish. And now I'm actually getting some dusty notes as well. So I'm getting like 1960s era balsamic, weeded bourbon dusty notes, which is pretty cool. But it's combining with this kind of like old school, funky oak and funky leather note that I would probably associate more with like a 1980s, 1990s bourbon. That's a lot to say on a first sip. I know the secret is that I took a lot of sips there because I kept having to retake this portion because I just kept fumbling over my words because I couldn't get it out correctly. So I probably took like 5 sips between the time that I talked 1 minute ago and right now. But that's okay. I'm gonna go back in now for a second sip, which is probably like my 6th or 7th sip. Yeah, and so on that second sip, now it's just all butterscotch. Now it's just like old school makers, old school turkey, Barterhouse, which is another Diageo brand. I think this is Diageo Blade & Bow, but the Barterhouse 20 had a lot of butterscotch on it. Now that second sip, all butterscotch, all kind of dusty bourbon vibes. The fruit notes are starting to fade away. As I continue to sip this, the fruit takes a back seat. The chocolate, the vanilla cream, the oak, the leather, the cardamom, all of those things are now starting to jump out a little bit more with a little bit of that kind of slightly bitter, nutty marzipan kind of note that I talked about. So I feel like I've just said a lot of words. I'm having a hard time even getting through this video because this whiskey is so fun and so good. It's not perfect, like I'm not gonna give this a 100 out of 100, but I do think this is a whiskey that's probably gonna get rated higher than anything else that I've tasted this year. Part of that is because I love oak on my whiskey. I don't shy away from it. It's really hard for me to find an over oaked whiskey. Usually it's just a whiskey that has off notes as opposed to being over oaked. So I really think this is a fantastic bottle. I would love to know what it tasted like at cask strength because I don't believe 109 is cask strength. Let me do one final sip. All right, I killed my glass. As I pour out a little bit more because I want to take a sip at the end of the video, I'm gonna go ahead and rate this whiskey. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give this whiskey a 96 out of 100. I don't think I've ever given a 96 out of 100 for a video here on the channel. This is probably the first one of those. And for me, if you check my rating scale in the description of the video, 96 is getting into like best of what I've tasted sort of territory. Up to 95 is exceptional whiskey. 96, we're starting to move into that rarefied air sort of thing. I think this Blade & Bow belongs in that conversation. It's not a perfect whiskey. I don't know exactly what to expect at 30 years because I don't have a frame of reference for this, but I think the mid palate is a little bit soft for me. And I think if the proof was beefed up, because again, I don't think this is cask strength, I think it might fix some of that, issue in the mid palate, excuse me. So 96 out of 100. I'd love to know if you guys had the opportunity to try this at a bar or whatever the case may be. I think for this whiskey, if you're at a bar and you're willing to spend money on a pour, I would not shy away from paying $80 for an ounce of this because it really is kind of like a once in a lifetime experience to taste something this old. So I think shell out the money for it. I think if you're looking at secondary and you're looking to spend $2,000 on a bottle, I don't think it's quite worth that, overall. And that's coming from me, somebody who will spend stupid amounts of money on whiskey, not only for the channel, but also because, it's my hobby, it's what I spend money on. I don't think this is a $2,000 bottle. Do I think it's a $1,200 bottle? I don't know. Probably not. I'd like to see this as a super high-end luxury bottle, more in the like $800 range, SRP. $1,200 feels expensive, but the collector in me couldn't help but to pick this up. I did get it at SRP, which was a very lucky find. Shout out to an anonymous friend who helped me pick this up. But even at $1,200, I'm like, I don't know. I'm glad I have it. I'm gonna drink the crap out of it. I can crush this bottle any day of the week, but I do think it's a little bit pricey, even with that 30-year age statement, because the mid palate just suffers a little bit for me. But overall, delicious whiskey, so fun to taste it, so fun to kind of wrap up this chapter of Drums and Drams in this studio. Again, last review, or maybe one of the last reviews in this room. So that's gonna do it, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you've tried this thing. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.